Hey guys, today we're talking about this huge graphic novel compilation. This is Girls by the Luna Brothers, and this is the complete collection, which is issues 1 through 24. So that's the entire collection, that's all there ever was. And this came out quite a while ago. This complete collection was put together in 2011. However, I'm pretty sure it ran through 2009. So this came out a couple of years later. It is M-rated. There's a naked lady on the cover here. And it's by Image Comics, so that kind of tells you right away that it's like an indie comic, and it's a sci-fi kind of horror-y type of thing. Uh, and there's 4 different sections in here, 4 different parts, so I'm assuming you kind of could have collected it as volumes, 4 separate volumes. And the names of the volumes are actually kind of quite telling as to what's going to happen throughout. So part 1 is called Conception, part 2 is called Emergence, part 3 is called Survival, and part 4 is called Extinction. And as for the plot, it does tell you a little bit on the back, but I'm just going to tell you in my own words. It's about Ethan Daniels, who lives in Penny's town. It's a very small town, it's population 65, and he kind of goes on a sexist tirade against every woman in a bar after he gets drunk and very angry. And after he leaves the bar, he gets in his car. Not a good idea, folks. He gets in his car, and on his way home, he almost runs over a naked lady. And he does offer to take her to the hospital and do the right thing. However, she just gets in the car with him and they go back to his place. And of course, being that she is very attractive and he's very lonely, they do end up having sex. And the next morning, he wakes up to find that she has laid a whole bunch of eggs in his bathroom. Not normal. And those eggs hatch into fully grown clones that look like her. And these females, these girls, attack any woman in town, and their goal seems to be to sleep with the men. And that's what happens. So, obviously, spoilers ahead because I have to get into detail as to what I think is going on in this. It is a little bit weird, and nobody has ever outright stated what this is about. However, I obviously have some theories. So, let's talk about the ship. They arrive in a ship. And when they arrive in the ship, only one girl arrives and is quickly attacked. She's kind of hit in the shoulder with a gun after she goes after one of the women on a farm. So they hit her with a gun and she takes off, wherein she mates Ethan. They sleep together, etc. She makes more. And so the ship that they arrive in, or she arrives in, is shaped like a giant sperm. Yes, it is. And so it's a certain size when it arrives, and it seems to grow bigger over time. The size of it seems to be due to a number of different factors. Number one, I think it's smaller because it was only carrying one girl. And also, it brings back other things for it to feed on, namely injured and dead women in the town. It doesn't bring back men for it to feed on, only women, which I think is quite important to note.
There is a scene in the book where a pregnant woman describes the steps she and her husband took to ensure higher chances of having a baby boy. Essentially, male sperm are stronger, but female sperm live longer, and the male sperm has to reach the egg first. And this is probably why only girls are being cloned, since only women are being absorbed.
It does attack men. If men get too close, the tail of it will like go right through you, kind of impale you, but it only feeds on women. So the girls will bring back women to the ship, and they'll kind of get absorbed into the ship and then kind of explode. And as that happens, it seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger the more it feeds. Let's talk about the girls a little bit. They are incapable of proper speech. They can only mimic what they've already heard. The first girl that Ethan comes across says they killed Ma. This is the first thing she's heard because she killed um, one of the women in the Penny's town. She killed Ma Pickett. So her husband and her son said she killed Ma. And that's the first thing she hears, and she echoes that back to Ethan. So Ethan thinks that her mother was killed. That's not what happened, but understandably, that's what he thinks. And later on, the girls actually use mimicry to get the women to come out. They mimic the voices of their children to kind of bait them and get them to come out, and so they could attack. Now, as I said, they seem to only attack females. However, they will attack males in certain situations. There is a gay man in town named Seth. They attack him because they feel that he's useless to their purpose, which is to procreate. Because he's gay, he's not going to want to have sex with them. They attack him. And likewise, there's a man named Lester who later on is castrated by one of the women because he's had sex with too many of the girls. And after that, they attack him because, again, he's not going to be able to procreate. He's useless. So their number one priority is obviously to multiply in numbers, but number two is to feed the ship. That comes second. If they see a group of women and there's dead or injured among them, they'll actually go for them and bring them back to the ship first before attacking the healthy women, which is interesting because you'd think they'd want to attack them first, but no, they don't do that. They are capable of feeling. At one point, there are a number of unhatched eggs that get burned. So there are unborn lives in there that get burned. And you can see them crying out in anguish. So obviously, they are grieving for all of the lives lost. And so I do think that they're very capable of feeling emotion, even though they don't show it all that often. One thing that's very interesting to note here is that when the ship landed, it kind of generated this sphere over Penny's town, so they're unable to get out, and anybody else is unable to get in. These girls would multiply a lot faster outside of this sphere. So the fact that they decided to contain themselves to such a small area, population only 65, remember, I think that's very telling to the fact that they're not trying to take over the world. They're in a very small town. I think they're only trying to multiply to a certain extent. They're not trying to wipe out the entire human race. And one of the big aspects to this series is actually gender commentary. If you're looking at this book a certain way, you could actually think that it comes off quite sexist. That's actually kind of the point, though, is that they're trying to say that some women think of all men a certain way and all men think of all women a certain way. Now, there's a number of different points here I have written down, and some of it is going to require me to direct quote certain things. Anyway, so at the very start, I mentioned that Ethan goes on a quite sexist tirade at the bar. It's interesting to me that he says that all women are the same, and then right after that, there's a species of women that all look the same and act the same. I don't think that's a coincidence. And later on, he seems to have it in his head that the girl he slept with is different from all the rest. Probably because he slept with her and seems to think there's a connection there. He says, I really thought that you were different, that only your clones were twisted, not you. I really don't know anymore. Maybe you're just like all the other girls. And that's relevant because I think a lot of people, both men and women, will think that there is a deeper connection there just because you've become intimate with somebody, and that's not necessarily true. Throughout the series, the men admit to having sex with the girls because they're helpless. So this obviously denotes the fact that men are incapable of controlling themselves, controlling their baser instincts, which is obviously a stereotype, but they felt the need to touch on that. And one of the characters wants to send out a group of men to look for help, and a female character named Nancy says the men will just sleep with all the girls and make more trouble for everybody, and that they'll sleep with anything, which again, it's kind of a stereotype. Not every man is like that, but it's something that a lot of women do think. And the same character, Nancy, does end up tying up all of the men and locking them in a shed because several of the men have had sex with the girls and therefore made more of them, and they're just making a ton of trouble for everybody. And when she does this, she doesn't lock up the children, including her own son, who comes to her and asks her why he isn't tied up with the rest. And she tells him it's because he's not old enough to make trouble for everybody. He's not dangerous. And so he asks when he grows up, is he going to hurt women the same way the other men do? And she just looks really upset. I think she believes that he could. Now, the chief in the town named Wes is kind of funny because I think he thinks he's really old-fashioned and that he's not like all the other men in the town, which maybe is true, but maybe it's not so true. At one point in time, he actually basically says that women are helpless and need men's protection. He says, whatever happens, I'm sure the women are more scared than you are. I know they can be difficult, but just consider what they're going through. You can't just abandon them. They need our protection. And every other man that he's speaking to there is basically just like, you realize that they're the ones running this, right? Because they had all the guns at that point and had locked up the rest of the men who hadn't run away, so they were handling shit. They were okay. And again, Wes at one point is basically saying how all of the men are dangerous. He's saying this to a girl he's interested in, of course. He's saying how all the men are dangerous because they will just go out and make more eggs and therefore make more clones. But he's conveniently leaving himself out of that statement, like he would never ever do that. Have you ever heard this in life where it's like, oh, I'm not like that? Yeah. If given the chance, who knows, right? Like he can't say that for sure. He's never actually had the chance to be put in that situation where we would have to say no.
This is also a point brought up by the character Seth at one point in reference to the women, that if the eggs hatched beautiful young men, who out of the women could you then trust?
And of course, there's a lot of different commentary about women being nags and just all this sort of thing going back and forth between the men and the women and not trusting each other. And that's put there for a reason because, you know, in our heads sometimes we do have these ideas about the opposite sex, but a lot of times we can be wrong. Now, the last thing I really want to touch on is the fact that I think that this ultimately, in the end, is about alien race survival. The opening and ending lines actually echo each other. It goes, the cycle begins with an eruption. They push outward with unwavering resolve, never stopping and never explaining, only creating. Their movements appear disjointed, spontaneous, yet there is poetry behind the proliferation, structure behind the chaos. The path is unforgiving and many will fail, but this journey is not meant for the weak. This is life. It is beautiful and it is ugly. And even the drawings joining together, those scenes are very, very similar. It is actually, you know, showing the journey of, you know, sperm kind of shooting outward into the world. but in two very different situations. So in the beginning, it's like Ethan kind of touching himself and that leading nowhere. But in the end, it's the giant ship shooting up into space, one single girl kind of beginning the cycle of life over again. And she's probably traveling to a very distant planet to help her species start over again because it didn't work out so well on Earth. And there are several different characters that say things throughout the book that would kind of hint that possibly these girls have had quite a bit of a struggle wherever they're from. There's a character named Yang Ma who says, "Life is a struggle, it takes things from you. But if you're patient and smart, sometimes you can take things back." And at first glance, you would think maybe she's talking about herself because her house has been taken over by all these other people. But at the same time, in the next shot, it's showing the girls dragging the dead bodies back to their ship, and you're thinking, well, maybe they've had a huge struggle wherever they're from, and this is them trying to take something back, trying to start over again. There are a few scenes towards the end of the book where I actually think that the original clone who landed there is speaking telepathically to Ethan. It seemed, at first it might seem like it's a hallucination or a dream, but I actually think that they were communicating in some way. And she asks Ethan why he killed a bee on his neck without hesitation. Because she admires the way that they work and think together, and that even though their actions seem random and trivial, they're not. She wonders if Ethan always kills things before they've had a chance to hurt him, and says that everybody faces enemies in their path, and they're not the humans' enemies. And like I said before, because they're contained to such a small area, I really don't think they were trying to have a hostile takeover, even though they did kill some people. Most likely, they feel threatened by the women because they're the ones who are already with the men, and they do seem like somewhat more animalistic species, so if they see a threat, they want to take it out. For example, at one point, the men are being threatened by a bear, and they kill the bear to protect the men. However, when the men attack each other and like get into a fight, they don't break it up because it's almost like a survival of the fittest situation. So that's okay. But if something threatens the men, or, you know, if a female is already in their corner, it's almost like the animal kingdom. They want to get there first. And I don't necessarily think that they were trying to replace the women in Penny's town either and like stay there indefinitely, because it almost seemed like they were trying to replenish the energy of the ship and then take off in the end. I don't think they would have kept feeding the ship if they had intended to stay. So, I mean, yeah, it's a very weird book, but I think there are hints throughout it as to what's actually going on. And I mean, all I have are theories that I've just offered up to you, and I don't know if any of you have read this, if you would agree with me or not, but I think I've made sense of at least most of what was going on. Let me know what you think down below if you agree with me. If you have a different theory, I'd love to know it too. Either way, I think it's a really cool book, and I always love to support indie comics because they're always doing something very different, as witnessed here. This is obviously a very different book. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next review. Bye!